everybody, and welcome back to the Seeking Play podcast. I'm Dr. Jane Hession.
I'm Ronan Healy.
And this is just a reminder for listeners at home that you can also watch our videos on Spotify and YouTube. This can be useful as a number of our guests throughout the season built some of their answers using Lego. In today's interview, we were joined by the fantastic Dr. Susan Hrach. Susan is the author of the 2022 Silver Nautilus award-winning book, Minding Bodies: How Physical Space, Sensation, and Movement Affect Learning. As an undergraduate, Susan spent a year studying at the University Innsbruck in Austria, which shaped her lifelong interests in world literature, translation studies, and global education. Currently, Susan is the director of the Faculty Center and professor of English at Columbus State University in Georgia. Susan has been recognized by the University System of Georgia with the Statewide Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Award. She has also served as a scholar for the USG's Executive Leadership Institute. Having rewatched Susan's interview, we picked out a number of quotes that we really enjoyed that we would like to share with you at home. So, quote number 1, play is a way of delaying our predictions, so we're more open to our perceptions. Quote 2, we have not built classrooms that offer enough space for students to move while they're learning and thinking. And finally, quote 3, cognition does not end at the boundaries of our skulls. We are very capable of making use of the tools around us and the other human beings around us too. So I think one of the key messages in Susan's book is the centrality of the body to learning. This is such a simple truth, but I think it's so important for learning. And I think as academics, sometimes we can forget this. So we hope that you enjoy the interview as much as we did.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Bye-bye, folks.
Take care. Bye. Susan Hrach, welcome to the Seeking Play podcast. We are very excited to have you on today's show. Thank you again for taking the time to come and have a chat with us today. Now, Susan, we are very eager to talk to you about your book, your fantastic book, which is how we obviously came across you, Minding Bodies: How Physical Space, Sensation, and Movement Affect Learning. But before we do, I'm going to take you right back, Susan. I'm going to ask you to share with the listeners, what were you like as a kid?
Yeah, so I was a kind of kid who I was the oldest child in my family, the oldest grandchild on both sides of my parents' family. My own parents are both oldest children. So I was a sort of, my mother used to say 30 years old at the age of 5, I wanted to be a grown-up. And I liked being with grown-ups, and I wanted to eavesdrop on all of their conversations. So I was really independent, and I feel now so fortunate to have grown up in a time and a place where that was really encouraged and it was fine. So I rode my bicycle all over the world in our little town. I, took myself to piano lessons and, walked back and forth to school and with friends, and just lived a very kind of played outside a lot, had a great school and loved school. So yeah, I mean, I was given lots of freedom and independence, and I took every bit of it I could get.
So again, sounds like a wonderful childhood.
Yeah.
But there's always bumps, bruises, scrapes, blows to the head, some part of your body. But can you think of a time during childhood that actually helped form your identity as an adult now?
Yes. I had a playground fight in grade 3, so I was about 9, and it was a big drama at the school because it was started when I believe, I'm not remembering this incorrectly, the boys were playing a game of kickball in which they declared that no girls were allowed to play. And so that made me super angry because I really enjoyed outdoor activities in recess and kind of prided myself on being a good a good athlete. I could get in there and play with the boys. And so I stood on the sidelines and started taunting one of the boys and was yelling out, making fun of his height and he finally lost his temper and ran over and grabbed me by the arms and spun me around and let go. And so then by the time I landed on my elbow, I broke my elbow. Oh yeah. And so then this was the big school drama because, I was in hospital and I had, all the get well cards and the fuss made over me. And I remember feeling distinctly like, I was getting all of the sympathy and attention because I had been hurt. But it wasn't quite fair, was it? Because I instigated that fight I was responding to the situation, but I reflected on it as an adult and realized it was such a early gender conflict. I think it did really shape my sense of myself as a girl, a woman. It shaped my feminism. And yet later on, when I thought about what happened to this boy who was blamed for the whole thing, it did seem like, no one really acknowledged my part in the fact that I provoked him. And he just happened to act out physically, but I was verbally, provoking him. And so, I feel kind of guilty about that.
And it was only when you reflected back on it that, even though you were hurt physically, he was hurt emotionally, but that was probably overlooked at the time as well.
That's right. That's right. And I knew after the fact that, as long as I kept track of him, because we moved away from that town when I was about 12 or 13, he actually kind of got a reputation as like a bad kid,
Right.
And so this is just all really unfortunate, but it's an example of an injury that I had that sort of shaped my thinking about myself and others.
Yeah, it's always an interesting answer. It becomes such a rich answer. And I suppose the reason why we ask is I think oftentimes adults think we've crossed a threshold when we're 12 or 14 and you transition into adulthood or 16. And those two parts of your life are distinct. But yeah, from hearing your story, certainly not. I wonder now, as you were saying, is there partly we don't want to reflect on being bullied or being a bully? Is that, I don't know, let's not get into that. That could be a whole podcast in itself, but is there some adult guilt?
Yeah.
A fear of looking back?
But
I think also, we've raised awareness about bullying. So that probably provoked my reflections on my own childhood in a way that I wasn't really thinking about as I was growing up.
Yeah, true.
Okay, well, I am going to segue into adult playfulness, Susan. And can you share with the listeners what adult playfulness means to you?
Yeah, I think that you're right. We have a unnecessary kind of division that we think we've separated ourselves from childhood in late adolescence. But it has to do with having being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to sort of just take chances, take risks, which sometimes involves lowering your inhibitions, being willing to be uncomfortable. And I think it's not a coincidence that for adults, that often means low lighting and substances that help us to lower our inhibitions. We're more willing to be playful. I'm thinking right now about the karaoke scene, that's a form of adult playfulness, I think, but as they say at my local establishment where there was karaoke, we need some liquid courage before we do that.
And so we provided you with a series of quotes, play-related quotes, kind of some of the more famous quotes, or ones that really kind of resonated with us as we were on our kind of playful journey. And you picked Mark Beckoff, who said, "Play is training for the unexpected." So out of the variety of like 20 that were there, why that one?
It just really grabbed me, first of all, because it was short and sweet, and I like minimal, kind of concise statements. And the word expected and unexpected immediately took me to the neuroscience of brains, in that we're always making these tiny predictions about what we expect. And so we literally perceive the world according to prior expectations. And so play is one of the really important ways that we can turn off that predictive, I don't know if we turn it off, but we, sort of manage to delay it maybe a bit, so that we're more open to our perceptions and our the input that we're taking in from our senses, in a way that is energy intensive, but also the way that we learn. And so, yeah, play and mindfulness, I think, are the ways that I know of to achieve that kind of more open brain state.
And Susan, how do you balance taking your work seriously, but also not taking your work seriously?
In my particular case, was always a serious student, thinker, but I found myself with a young family at an early age. And so I was always sort of dealing with small children and serious work at the same time. And in a lot of ways, I think that was kind of ideal, because I could only give to my work the available time that my little people were prepared to let me at it. And it because I always had this kind of demanding domestic life, I also just my work was not sort of the only thing that mattered to me. And so it was just a really, I think in hindsight, a fortunate balance.
Cool. Yeah, I think we can certainly kind of that speaks to our lived experience at the moment. We've got a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I think our little 2-year-old, as much as you're engaged in the act of play, by him not sleeping, I think we're in this kind of weird liminal state where we're probably more creative and jaded at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, I could tell you a million stories, but one of them that I think applies is that I used to lock myself in the room that had the computer in it to try to get a little writing done, and put the children in front of SpongeBob SquarePants. One time this little note got shoved under the door, and my daughter had written, "Is it okay to watch one more episode? Check 1." And then she had little boxes, yes, no, So I grabbed that little note, yes, and stuffed it back under the door, but that's the sort of interactions that I, was dealing with.
And I think that's so common, especially when you work for yourself. It is so incredibly hard to keep the balance with small people and keeping a business alive. So staying on track about your career, you've had a wonderful career, Susan. If I can take you back to the very start of your career, what advice would you give to your younger self about either being more playful or more serious in the way that you thought and or interacted with other people?
I appreciate about others who supported me and who mentored me, when they gave me permission to bring my whole human self to work. And so, I mean, you can never underestimate having some laugh, just letting people sad or happy, or bring their real dreams to work. I had one mentor who said, you need to make this place, being the university, the place you want it to be. Be the change you want to see. And that's just so empowering as a really young new professional. I appreciated it.
It's fantastic.
How did you become interested in your field of research?
Started out and still am teaching in the area of early modern literature and world literature from antiquity to the early modern period. And so that's really challenging to teach because the typical university student just doesn't see the relevance. Why do we care about older literatures? And I was also really excited to participate at my university in our study abroad programs. And so I was able to take classes both to England and to Italy to study that same subject, but be in the places where it was written, where the settings of the poems or dramas or plays were. And it changed the learning experience so much. Suddenly it was super interesting to them, and they were very happy to talk about the 14th century nunnery because we were sitting on the ruins of the grounds, Whereas, in a modern classroom in the US, why would we be interested in 14th century, nuns? And so that got me started wondering how we could bring some of that interest of the setting itself, how, we can't bring everyone on a study abroad experience. And so I started reading the neuroscience, and I started with Antonio Damasio, talking about the ways that there's I think it was the loop, the as-if loop, that helps us to recall sensory experiences that are connected with our feelings. And then that took me to Lisa Feldman Barrett, who then revised sort of thinking a little bit into a more constructive approach. And so I was really always motivated by how learning body impact on thinking, on cognition, would apply in a classroom setting, and how we could make that more immersive kind of experience that I'm able to accomplish through the environment in study abroad, something that we can do in other ways in a setting that's, in my home.
Okay, I think that really, is a perfect segue again to your book. So, Susan, in your book, Minding Bodies, your opening chapter is entitled "No More Brains on Sticks." Always, always, always on our desk. Can you elaborate on what happens when we perceive students as mere brains on sticks?
Yeah. Can I just say I heard another great metaphor for this just yesterday? Bodies are not brain taxis. That's a nice one too, isn't it?
And I think in one of your interviews, Susan, you said, is it the body is a chauffeur of the mind? Did you say? Yeah, that was.
Yes, yeah. There's several that get at that same idea. Yeah, I think we are preventing students from having better learning experiences when we don't recognize that you think with your whole body and you think through affordances in the environment. If I think we're just, and this is cognitive psychology as well, has been heavily influenced in the 20th century by the idea of brain as computer. And a computer operates the same way no matter where you take it, what time of day it is. It doesn't have an embodied, presence. And that's really not how brains work. And so I find that really interesting in all these conversations about AI as well, because until you can build an AI that has a human flesh and blood body around it, I'm just not persuaded it will ever be human in its capacity to think. It's impossible to replicate human thinking without a human body.
Rupert Dreyfuss would say same as well. Back in even in the 60s or 70s, I'm going to say, Professor Dreyfuss, pretty much was challenging that belief. It feels like it's cyclical. Feels like it comes back when there's a new evolution of AI. But yet, the body is such a necessary thing.
Yeah. I think just to add one more thing to that question. When it turns out that students' brains are not machines,
Mhm.
we tend to just be continually surprised and disappointed, oh, why didn't they perform as well on that exam, or why, and I think we're thinking of the performance of the brain in just an errant way.
But it's even creating that awareness, not only for academics, but it's also for the student to understand, in order to have an efficient learning environment, their mind and their body have to be connected. They can't be separated. And I think, there is that disconnect. And I think a lot of students think that there is no connection with the body and the mind.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's a big issue at the moment.
So I'm going to read a quote from your wonderful book, big fans again. If we're really serious about optimizing the brain to improve student learning, the necessary change in our practices will require significant commitment to a new way of conducting classes. Being in college will need to feel more like moving through college. My purpose here is to explain why human beings are optimized to think while moving, and to persuade you to integrate into your disciplinary teaching the insights of embodied cognition, a field of science that explores the body's role in cognitive processes. Can you talk us through the role of the body in the learning process?
Well, the brain is just really energy intensive. And so your physical body has to supply the energy that your brain needs. And if you are not well rested, if you're not well nourished, if your body is fighting off some sort of infection, that's going to affect the available energy that your brain has. There's also just the experience that I think most of us have, witnessed in our personal lives, that we gain a lot of energy from movement while we're thinking. So this is why taking a walk is just so key to creativity and clarity and being able to gain a new insight into something. It's because you're moving your body. And so the challenge at schools, and particularly at universities at this point, I think, has a lot to do with our infrastructure for that. We just have not built rooms that offer enough space for everyone to move while they're learning and thinking. And we just haven't. We're still building the infrastructure of education as if we're in a factory, and everyone is just a little widget in a row that needs to, magic learn by listening quietly to someone else talk. And this is just a mismatch, I think, between now how we understand learning works and the built environment.
And it's not a support. You're not putting the student at the core of the learning environment. If it's only, the lecturer at the top of the stage walking around, I mean, that doesn't work. The students have to be engaged. And I think as well, even from, my own experience as a lecturer and as a student, when you go into these big dark rooms and empty seats and, your brain does go into autopilot. You've been here before, and you speak about this in your book, you've been here before, and you switch off and you don't engage. Your brain automatically, this is familiar, and you switch off. And I know for me, as a student, I was definitely guilty of that with, going into the big lecture theaters with 500 students. I was there because there was probably attendance being taken, and I had to be there, if I'm going to be honest.
Right. Right.
So, not all the time, but many, I'm definitely guilty of that for sure.
Yeah. And I think the autopilot prevents students from even having the capacity to correctly hear, for example, new terminology, or even, I think anyone who has ever taught has had the experience of having a student repeat back to them something that they and you as the instructor say, there is no possibility I ever said that. Like, this is so way off base. I can't imagine how they heard this message. And it's because their brains were on autopilot. And so they were just hearing what they kind of expected to hear. And our brains are just so unreliable. We really mishear things because we're just trying to conserve energy and predict what we expect to hear.
So with regard to the physical classroom, you talk a lot in your book about the role of the physical classroom and, you know, the importance of this in the student, you know, for students and their learning outcomes. Can you talk us through this, please?
I think this is one of the more fascinating things I learned about was that our cognitive processes do not end at the boundaries of our skulls. We are very sensitive and capable of making use of the tools around us and the other human beings around us. And so the environment itself can offer affordances to learning, which would be interacting with other people, or as you have right behind you, the, place to offload your cognition and have that be a shared artifact. So, we typically are used to taking notes that are private for us, and okay, that's good. But when we're sharing sense making in a more public way so that everyone can see what sense each other is making out of, this material, the environment can make that learning moment just incredibly more effective. We just have to have those supports provided in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I for a while, I actually technically worked for Jane. I embedded service design and some economics and entrepreneurship into their college. And one of my provisos was I need whiteboard walls. Like I really need, for me, my probably ADHD part of me, like I need to scribble, but I also need to ensure that I've got active students. And there was probably about a 6 or 8 month time period before it happened. But the students literally became different students.
Mm-hmm.
The engagement, the conversations, it felt like I'm interacting with, and not interacting, but like I'm engaged in this wonderful conversation with a different person by just putting up some whiteboard paint. So yeah, big advocate for whiteboard paint.
And even with regard, the physical classroom, we gave so much thought to even the furniture. So we had, designers working with us. And we also had, it was an advertising faculty, a journalism faculty, and a business faculty. So the head of the advertising faculty was wonderful, talking about, we need beanbags, we need specific furniture to engage the student, we need the whiteboards, we
Lego.
need them standing up,
we need
we
Lego.
need Lego.
Yeah.
And I think as well, it's very, a lot of people will say, a lot of people I know in academia will always say, well, I can't, head off on, field trips. I can't do excursions. I don't have time for that. But, what's wonderful, I suppose, about your book as well is it doesn't have to be, big steps. We can even start introducing things in the classroom, like the meditation, like the body scanning. And I think that that's wonderful as well. We can make small incremental changes.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. There's an appropriate moment, the theater of a good lecture, perhaps, but not every single time, not for 75 to 90 minutes uninterrupted, right? I mean, it's all about the variety there.
In your book, because we're talking about in the classroom and creating, again, lovely to hear you talk about affordances, the Gibsons, it's a key phrase. Can you talk to us about when you brought your students outside? Like, what was that experience like for you and them?
Yeah, I think this is really important. I had a definite learning process from making mistakes when I went outside. Being out in the fresh air, with all of the ambient noise, and I have my windows open here, so we may hear some ambient noise behind me. It heightens your brain's alertness. And that has to do with the natural light and everything about being outdoors. So that's an advantage. The flip side, though, is that, and students told me this, they became distracted easily because now you're outside. Now there's, people walking past on the sidewalk. Now there's something else that's distracting your attention. And so what I eventually learned was that the key to bringing students outdoors, you also need lots of movement, activity that would engage small sets of people talking together, not the capacity for everyone or most of us to, be quiet while we listen to one person speaking. That's not going to work outside. Even if the one person speaking is another student, that it's just too hard. And so what I learned about going outside is that you need to create small conversational groups. You need to give them interesting tasks and activities to, keep them engaged and not just sitting. And lots of options, to complete let them find a spot or go to the places that they would like to go, wander a little bit. And I think that's been the key for me.
Great tips.
Yeah.
I think you just become so entrained in your embodied cognition, how your natural order of movement, entrains your thinking. You probably would have thought of, I'll just bring the students outside and then I'll talk to them the same way, but hey, we're outside.
That's right. That's right. And then you see, it's lovely, like as you walk past and someone's teaching class outside, but you can see that everyone's sort of lost their focus, And
I think now more than ever, though, with the amount of change and transformative, change that universities and private colleges all over the world and corporations have had to go through over COVID, they are, on, the positive side, the opportunity side is they should be much more open now to new ways of doing things and new ways of learning, because, most universities had 24, 48 hours to go online. So I think, these, big changes that we would have spoken about many years ago, going outside, that's pretty radical. It shouldn't be now, especially COVID, we're able to, we can be brave, we are more creative, we can be curious, and, we can be a bit bolder now in our, or I suppose decisions.
Yeah, you're so right, Jane. I think that's the silver lining of the pandemic, isn't it? There were so many things that we had to change right away that it kind of freed us to think about other big changes.
And we see that with, our clients that we work with, people are, that's the opportunity side of COVID. People are much more open now and braver to make decisions. And, people are, being much more curious as well, which is, obviously, fantastic for us. But I am going to keep on with your book.
Okay.
I have a quote from your book that I would just like to talk to you about. So, the goal of increasing one's interoceptive awareness isn't to become more accurate, but rather to gain more control over or attention to internal signals and to better regulate our responses to them. So how would this then translate in the classroom, Susan?
This is a process, I think, for a lot of people who have become disembodied. It's not easy to just be able to monitor, recognize, and interpret your interoceptive signals well, because a tummy that's, feeling we call it butterflies or, nervous, could be anxious. It could be excited. It could be, there's the signal itself and then the interpretation of what that signal means. Having the capacity to kind of recognize the signal and then frame it or reframe it in a way that might help you to recognize it as, say, excitement rather than nervous is a really important skill, and it takes practice. So some things that I've done with students in the classroom, for example, are to lots of sort of stretching and giving themselves an opportunity to kind of be present in the moment. So, I don't really give exams anymore, but I was stepping in for someone who was giving an exam recently, and I had everyone stand up and, get big, stretch their arms out and do, I think, what's sometimes referred to as the power pose, like feel like you've already held this exam. And I told them, I said, your confidence level does take its signals from your body. And so, you're going to do great. Let's all, take some deep breaths and feel capable and confident. And, the academic controversy about that posing is that, of course, the effects are short term. You can,
Mhm.
it's not like I did a power pose and now my whole life is different. I think students are happy to be offered those kinds of tools, and then they can use them again.
I read in one of your interviews about dancing. Have you been brave enough yet to start dancing, Susan, with your students?
I once, and it was later in the semester after we had known each other for long enough that I felt more comfortable. Yeah, I mean, I really like to dance. I know that, it's so unexpected in an academic setting. It feels like you're violating this norm that's, really, uncomfortable. And yeah, the main challenge I think was that we couldn't get the music to be as loud as we would have wanted. And I couldn't, instantly turn it into a discotheque. But yeah, we did it. We danced a little bit and it was fun.
So in your final chapter of your book, you outline 5 recommendations for teachers to center the body to learning. So can you explain each of them, or some? If you got 1 or 2, that'd be good.
Yeah.
And some resistance educators may encounter when trying to implement them. So dancing, I'm sure, is that's a tough one to get in there.
Yeah, dancing for me, that's still, it takes a lot of nerve. So the recommendations are really just to, first of all, to recognize that the room itself could be hugely shaping the behavior of everybody in it. And so anything you can do, I know it's unfortunate, so many buildings you can't open the windows, but if you can, just get some fresh air in the room, or do whatever rearrangement is possible, or add whiteboards or those temporary giant sort of Post-it notes, or what hacking of the space might be necessary to make it a more brain empowering space. To go outside whenever you can. And maybe that's just twice during the term, but you don't have to go outside every day, but think about some moment when it might be effective. To have more sensory experiences in the classroom, which includes things like, giving them manipulatives like Lego or something else that they can touch would be ideal. For me, I sometimes cart volumes of older books from the library into the classroom to have them look at the bindings and the pages and smell them and, interact with the literature in a sensory way. We've talked a lot about building movement into classroom time and using that movement to build the social relationships. So I didn't talk about this as much, but when you send students out to move together around, outside, or if you had the sort of skill to teach them a dance that would be like a line dance or something where they'd have to coordinate their movement, that actually promotes a sense of belonging and inclusion among the students, because they're having to work together with their bodies. And when we perform coordinated movement together, it signals to our brains that we're in this trusting sort of shared environment in which we're more likely to complete other tasks in a cooperative way together. So the resistance to all of that is, as I mentioned before, we're violating these norms. And students carry those same expectations into the classroom. We've all been in these traditional environments for generations now that treat the brain as a separate entity, a computer, as something that has nothing to do with your body. And so you have to be really transparent with students about what we know now that we didn't used to understand about, or that was never widely enough promoted about. We should try these things that feel weird because they're actually going to be more effective. And also just to be aware that, you know, when people have expectations that are unmet, that's a source of conflict. I mean, I think we all know this about active learning in general. Students sometimes have a really high resistance to it. It's not what they expect. Many of them have become very capable performers in traditional settings, and so they're very unhappy about having that skill set, you know, taken away from them. And so I think that's all the more reason to explain directly what the reasons are for changing up what we're going to do in a classroom.
And I think as well, what's so important to think about, you know, not just academics, but even in the work world, like we are asking students to do something that we're not really that comfortable doing, like sitting in a room, in a boardroom for 5, 6, 7 hours. So, you know, us as educators probably aren't that comfortable with it, but then our expectation is that a student should sit there for a 3-hour lecture and be actively engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yes. I mean, isn't it? I always find it so funny that like a conference, when you go from session to session and you're sitting all day, everyone's very cranky at the end of the day and they're saying, and you think, well, this is what we ask our students to do every day.
Basis. I know. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, buy and read Susan's book.
Fantastic. If you work in education, you need this book.
It's an important one.
It should be on your desk.
We're going to transition to a very playful aspect of this conversation, and you were very brave. Our tagline in our studio is "Be brave, play." Yeah, we posted you some Lego and posed some questions. Would you like to show us your wonderful?
I'd be happy to. All right, here we go. Build number 1. Do you want to?
Number 1. So, what inspires you about your work? What keeps you curious and motivated?
All right, here we go. Here's build number 1. All right. Okay, so this is my home. I live in a converted textile mill, cotton mill, with smokestacks that don't operate anymore. And I cycle to the campus. And that turns out to be one of the sources of great insight and new ideas. And I listen to podcasts often on the way. So this is a way that I stay kind of curious and get new ideas. And here's the campus. It's got its green. There's even a squirrel. There he is.
Oh, lovely.
Wow.
Yeah. But beyond that, I sometimes have the ability to fly over the ocean and visit cultures and places. I often like to bicycle when I'm in new cultures and places that do things completely differently than the way that I'm used to, and that keeps me in a curious and learning mindset. So I was so lucky to be able to spend the last academic year in Canada.
Wow.
I had a Fulbright to Carleton University in Ottawa. And so it was full of all sorts of lovely things. They just built a future learning lab there that was wonderful. And I was able to cycle and do lots of other active things at Carleton. So that was a treat.
Very cool. So question number 2, how do you think your work helps people think and feel differently about the world?
Okay, so this may be hard. I didn't think about, but all right. So here is, yes. All right.
Perfect.
Here is our student who is stuck behind these fences.
Mm-hmm.
But if they noticed that there was a way to escape, they could come outdoors where there's lots of other places to interact. And I did give the student 2 things to hold.
Mm-hmm.
They were the only 2 things I could find that fit in little hands. So whatever, they've got some tools. And so they would be able to use their hands to learn with and to escape the fenced in 4 walls of their indoor. I have a colleague who calls classrooms sensory deprivation chambers.
Oh, ouch.
Oh, isn't that great? That's Sarah Kuhn, Kuhn. She teaches with Lego all the time. Her book's called Thinking with Things.
Yes, Susan, you recommended her. I reached out to her and she just came back last week. She is going to be one of our guests.
Wonderful.
Fantastic. So there's the sensory deprivation chamber, but you could come out and be in this much more inviting space.
Wonderful. Final question.
Mhm.
What curiosity or conundrum just do you want to conceptualize? We just left this for we thought of this as like free play.
Yeah. So I tried to make this a little more abstract as well. So I just took all of the Lego that were the same color, and there it is. It's just the same dark brown.
Yeah.
And the abstract problem that I think I just wrestle with a lot is why people are so resistant to change and just are so stressed, I guess, by the idea that they might do something differently. That has never been, I think, the way that I tend to operate. I can't teach the same class twice over and over. I'm just incapable of teaching the same class twice.
Yeah.
And yet I know that there's a lot of people who teach the same class over and over and over again and don't change it. And so for me, that's a conundrum. Like what's behind that? Where, how can I offer invitations to do things? Because as you point out, this is sort of a radical change, and so how can we make some tiny steps towards it
and continue the momentum of that? Yeah. Wow. Well, that has been fantastic.
That's been awesome. I love your finishing up on something so simplistic yet so significant.
Susan, it's been an absolute treat.
Yeah, it really has
Today.
I really appreciate it.
We have both learned so much.
Well, it's so enjoyed being on Playful Podcast. Seeking Play was really fun for me too.
Yeah, thank you so much,
We're
Susan.
going to-